We are here in Bagni di Lucca at the Laszlo Institute for New Paradigm Research. And this weekend we've been attending a symposium on infinite consciousness. And Siegmar Gerken has kindly joined us, and we'd like to learn a little bit about your contribution to this weekend's symposium.
You want the contribution in advance. So my contribution is a lecture on the consciousness of the body and the realization of all times. Because we're talking about consciousness, we're talking about near-death experience, we're talking about past lives, but we got to realize when we talk about time, then we got to include past life, present life, and future lives as physics and states. And for me, there's also a space that I call in-between lives, so the state in between lives, because where do we go between lives? So in that way, and I'm a body-oriented and mindfulness-centered psychotherapist, that's why it's very important for me to have an understanding that the consciousness is also generated from the body, and from where we can also make contact with other moment of consciousness in other people or universal.
And where, from your research, is it that we do go between lives?
Of course, that research is subjective. So that is a state of being that can only be experienced. I mean, we may find again smart physical answers in quantum physics for that, but finally and ultimately, you can only experience that space.
I'm curious, when we're experiencing that space, because we've heard from many of the near-death experience speakers that the quality of love is very important in this conversation.
Well, my description of love is that love is a resonance with the flow of life. So I take it totally out of this esoteric or romantic meaning. So, and if you understand it more, that love is a resonance with the flow of life, and that we experience this flow as pleasure in our system, then you have a criteria for how you want to live your life.
So are we receptors of this on some level then?
We are receptors of the oscillating energy that we are part of all over the universe, and in us that we also create with our photon, because I also do biophoton research, or I've done some with Professor Pop, but more the understanding that love as a resonance with the flow of life is life all over. The whole universe is filled with life, even so different life forms. And I know in biology we have very clear point how we define life, and what's animated and not animated. But in general, it's life and existence. So if you resonate with that, that means you got to have an open system. You got to be in a state of flow yourself, otherwise you can't perceive that flow of love.
So we've spoken about resonance,
and the resonance
coherence
pattern, exactly.
Yeah,
so as I mentioned in our other meeting, so the creation of coherence is an important factor then in this. And how do we create coherence as human beings? So for that, we got to go a little bit earlier in the beginning of our life, and that is then the question: are we a biological accident, or did we take part in the decision-making process, and has there been some intention in manifesting in this body at this time on this planet in this universe? And if so, then how can that stay an experience? Because in that moment when we have an intention, that is a potential. Then it needs energy to be realized. That means there must be volition. So I direct my intention. And if I direct my intention, then it's the question, how much can we sustain that? And that's where normally my work begins. So in that moment, I lead people sometimes in that state of primordial energy. That means even beyond conception, and see whether they can make contact with a moment of intention to manifest. And of course I do that just as a moment of experience without any belief system. It should never come from a belief system. So it should come from an experience. And if people don't have an experience, that's fine. Then we start with the biological existence, because nobody can deny that. So if you come here with sperm and egg and you feel, here I am, by whatever reason and motivation, it were just my parents, and then all my drama began. That's what we get in psychotherapy.
Right.
So then we got to see there is a pulsation of being, as I call it. Because all life pulsates. Life is represented by pulsation. Everything that pulsates is alive. So in that moment we can see, when you are born, there is a pulsation, there is an aliveness. And that begins with the breathing, of course, also. I mean, we have that already intrauterine. Every cell pulsates, you know, and every cell combination pulsates, and we form organs, and organs form a structure, and a structure becomes a human being, and here we are. So the question is, how can we sustain this pulsation of being? Because in this pulsation of being, we carry our essence, our essential qualities. And that's a little bit different for me than what we in the Christian or in the Western world understand with the soul. So the essence for me is a continuous process of bringing our qualities into realization. That means it also constitutes a potential.
So where do personalities exist within the construct of this?
That's an important question for me, because our work and training is very meticulous in terms of personality. Because in that moment when we build a body, we have emotions and feelings. Our cognitive capacity comes into action with speaking, thinking, modeling life and so on, with all our parts of the brain that develop. And then we have a will. That means so that we can, let's see, execute our thinking in the world. That is the consciousness of the personality. And depending on your genes, on your qualities you bring, on your family, social, racial, religious context that you grow up in, there the personality will find its form and shape, and will always be from now on a filter in how you perceive reality. And that very often goes diametral with your free pulsation of life. So, however, socialization comes in, and we know that from ourselves. Even we grew up in a great time, in the 60s and 70s. So how is the free pulsation of life dimmed down? Let's say you can see by stress, by work, by money problems, by relationship issues, whatever issues we have in society. So we dim down the capacity for that free flow and free pulsation. And mostly we see that in frustration, in stress, in unfulfillment, or people move into a crisis. And a crisis mostly leads people to us. That when people feel something is not going anymore right, I need some support, I need help, I can't get out by myself. And that is a moment when we can come in and support the person to realize the limitation of the consciousness of the personality. That moment, by whatever technique, I mean, I'm 40 years in this work, so I'm not fixed on one technique. I use what's needed in the moment to make the limitation an experience, or make the expansion an experience. I may lead you in breathing exercise, we may do physical exercise, we may talk, we may reflect, we may move, dance, cry, whatever is needed to move you out of the closed systems of limitation into an experience where you feel, wow, there is another life, and I know this.
Right.
I know how I was free, and as a child I was running around, and I was much more happy before I took my job or whatever, before I went to school, kindergarten, wherever it begins. And it's accumulative, you know. So
So I'm curious, because you've been deeply engaged in this field, as you said, for over 40 years.
Yeah.
And we're in a very specific time now in terms of the shift that we're speaking about in humanity.
Yeah.
Are you seeing a difference in the issues that your patients are bringing to you? Do you find more people are we might say, waking up to the fact that they're not living in freedom, whereas they might have been satisfied on some level with that in the past?
You know what, I see a shift. I mean, every 15 to 20 years, you see a shift in society, just by generation. And then also therapy forms or forms how you ask changes. Let's say in our time, and I count you in there, we were looking for cathartic openings. We wanted the liberation. We wanted to have freer expression of sexuality. We wanted to have just ripping out your shirt, you know. So, and feel, wow, here I am again, you know. So some people got something out of it, including me, and some people got lost. So for them, it was not the right moment to be too cathartic. So, but now, years and years later, and having much more knowledge about the human psyche, we are much more refined in the work, and coming also and including our whole learning that we have the late 40 years in Buddhism, in Sufism, and in many, many other teachings, to see how can we derive and how can I formulate methods where I can reach you where you want to be invited in the opening. So let's say 20 years ago, there was more that people asked me, yeah, push my door in, I want to get out. Today it's more, can I invite you so that you open the door? And I think that has a deeper value. So the other shift is more by generation, by all the yoga that's on the market right now, Buddhism, meditation, that the younger people don't seem to process emotionally, not on that level so much anymore. And maybe we did something right, and society changed, and they have much larger insights into their life, or there's a more carefulness again, rowing back, not so much of an opening of emotions, and I see that too. So I see both ways. So we are much more careful in talking about emotions, especially in the business world when I teach and coach. There, where the mindfulness approach is more welcome as an intro, as an access. And once the people feel themselves in that limitation, I make them aware of limited breathing. I make them aware of a withheld movement. I make them aware of maybe thoughts that they don't allow, even though they carry them in them. Fantasies of a freer life that they don't allow them because morally they can't deal with that. And I invite them to open that because they are there anyway. When they exist in thought form, then they exist, period. So. But
we face right now also frequently a society or a culture that's not as accepting of these tools that you're providing your patients. So transparency is not always a quality that's received in the larger society. So how do you prepare your patients or your clients to become more self-actualized and also navigate the world in a
in general, I must say, since I'm so long in the market, very often people seek me out who are on their search and they want to go that way. So to a certain degree, I work with very advanced people who
so they've already had a community around them that can support the transformation.
Or they have done a lot of work already on themselves, and they don't come for a weekly session. They come for intensive once or twice a year to look deeper into a question. But in Hamburg, for instance, I train also some people in the behavioral field. And then we deal with people who have claustrophobia, who don't want to go into the elevator, and who have no other interest than functioning again. Their interest is not consciousness, their interest is not being in a spiritual world. Not at all. They want to function, you know.
Right.
And of course, millions of people get then treated with medication or visually with good therapy. But, and that is what I teach, yes, we need to work with what the person brings. I need to work on the claustrophobia, I need on the fear going to the elevator. But if I, as a therapist or teacher, don't hold the larger potential of that person, then the person can only remedy his moment of fear. My interest is, I hold a larger perspective for you, and I work with you on your issue that you bring. Because I don't want to do my session, you know, I want to work what you need, but I hold the larger perspective of existence. I know you are a spiritual being, and this whole universe coming with this little problem, it would be too easy to say, hey, you know what, come on, in the whole cycle of the universe, what does an elevator fear does for you? No? It's minuscule, you know. No, this is existential for that person.
Right.
So you have to take it very serious. But if I don't hold the larger perspective, then my experience is when the person integrated in moment of fear, can functioning again and so on, then all of a sudden other questions come. So, and if I don't hold that or don't have the capacity myself as a therapist, then that is what we do, and thank you, and that's it.
So that individual fear on some level becomes a sacred splinter that's actually opening the whole world.
Exactly. All of a sudden you feel that is then when I lead them into that primordial energy, if I feel they're ready for it.
Right.
So I see, can I lead them there? Let's see what the experience is. Just value free and to see what happens for you. And 40–50% come to an answer, or sometimes even more. And some, boy, it was nice there. It was like a meditation. I felt good there.
Right.
Great, I can say. Some even fall asleep. And that's wonderful, you know. So yeah, hey, for you, that's where it is.
Right, right.
So right now. And that is a deep acceptance, where how we go our paths and when do we take another step in our consciousness. And as you become aware, I try to avoid the term enlightenment. That's not my terminology. Because it's too overloaded with what steps can I do to get there. And my background, I come from Krishnamurti, and with Krishnamurti there were no paths, there were no 5 steps to or 7 steps to happiness. So there was deep inquiry into yourself and challenging your own ego, and then becoming aware what is the path that you want to choose in your life. And you got to walk that path. Right. And for that you need sometimes support, as I mentioned, in terms of supporting that intention and supporting the energy. Because how can energy be distorted? That's where the body-oriented work comes in. How did we, when you asked about the personality, how did we structure our body? From the beginning of time, when we structure how we take feelings in, or how we structure feelings from impulses of emotions, how our cognitive capacity comes in, and with that mind emerges, and that then in this mind field we hold the information of the personality, but we also gain the capacity to reflect about ourselves and change. That's what differentiates from animal structures or from other living existence. So that's where we come in and see what is the structuring, not only of your behavior, but how is your behavior also reflected in your body. And for that, I don't know whether I can go that deep or whatever. For that we got to understand that embryologically, that in the 5th to 7th week of gestation, nerve endings from the spine, from the spinal cord and from the brain attached to muscle tissue. And from that moment on, every information internally from our body movement, intrauterine already, is informed to the brain. And from that moment on, neuronal activity, nerve activity can structure muscle activity. That means from the 5th or 7th week on, there's no separation. See, when I in my class and my students say, oh, I'm in my head again, and I only ask, is the head part of your body? Then we laugh and we know, and then we understand, because there's no separation. So, and that's why tomorrow I will bring that also in. There's much more than the brain that we structure our body with, you know, and vice versa. And at the same time, there's no separation of anything if you think in fields. And when I talk about the body, I always talk about the body field. So it's not only on the structural level that we are, it's just a denser level because there's a denser vibratory pattern.
Right.
So that's what Einstein already said. There's no room for matter and the field in quantum physics because the field is the only reality. So and if we take that into account, then who are we? And body fields that oscillate, that vibrate, how can I perceive you? How can I tune in? How can I vibrate with you? So, and how can that also inform our interventions in therapy? How can I read the story in the body? So we teach it very detailed. And you can see it very practically. You don't need to become an aura seer to see the field. You learn to see how somebody structures him or herself and moves and expresses. And that's where my expression also come in, that repression of expression creates depression. So once you understand that energetic cycle, then you know, oh, let me invite you to express in the way that you feel ready to.
You know the world, you know the work of the community Tamara that we're also associated with, where they've built a field around this work.
Yeah.
And the difference in being able to do this kind of work within the context of a community that supports it.
I mean, I haven't been there, but knowing Dieter from 40 years ago and knowing that we had the similar beginning with Gestalt therapy, coming from the analytical understanding in Germany, you grew up like that, having Wilhelm Reich, you know, the Reichian work, and of course going through the same, I came then also from group dynamics and Dieter too, so it emerged in the same way. So I can imagine that you do just similar group work and building up a field and a setting like in every group where somebody can come and bring their own process in and can process it. So yeah.
How important do you think that culture can be in terms of helping the normal society outside of community to flourish?
I have two answers. One is, it would be absolutely wonderful and that could make larger circles, but you must also see it's threatening. The misunderstanding in these kind of circles, or in our old therapy circle of cathartic work and so on, is that understanding of grounding, of centering, of allowing somebody to root in its own essence and trust. Then I can challenge the system. Very often in therapy, the systems get challenged without the person being stabilized, grounded, having a regulation. I need to observe that first. So just throwing one in to such a group, I mean, I have a group next week here in Tuscany, it's not the same thing happen. Then you got to see, some people want to work from the beginning and do things, and some just already get plenty in just being there and taking in how other people process. And then it takes their time. So in that moment, yeah, absolutely, I feel the absolute value of this work, otherwise I wouldn't do it still after 40 years. So, whereas a lot of people moved out of this challenging work, but it's, let's say in America, and I live in America, I get sometimes introduced when I work as a European trained.
Oh, interesting.
And I always ask, what does that mean, European trained? So yeah, you still do individual sessions in front of the group. They don't do that here anymore.
Oh,
you know?
Interesting.
So, but that's how we process, you know. So no, it has a deep value, so that you can come in contact with your own truth and sense into it what would be the pathway of reflection, and at the same time deepening your own essence. And that is where we these days hear so much of neuroplasticity, you know. Change your brain, change this, change that, you know. Do you want to change your brain? That's one thing, you know. It is taken so easily. And what does that change mean when you change your brain? When you say, every learning process has the capacity to create new neuronal wirings. That's fantastic. But then we got to understand two things. The old one still stays. Boy, that gets very intense.
Yeah, we have a strident bell now.
Yeah, the old one still stay, and under physical and emotional stress, very often refer them to the old action.
Because the structure is still in place there.
Yeah, and because then you think, I knew better. How come I did that again under this aspect? Because the old neuron patterns are still there. So that means it takes 3 to 5 months to consolidate the new neuronal formation.
Interesting.
And I call that practice in being. So that means we need to develop a practice, a technique for everybody individual. So what would be beneficial for you so that you can stay in contact with the original pulsation in you in life. Because that will allow you then to feel that unity, so oneness that you are looking for. And then we move into a space that I call, from that place, we can make decisions from the will of the heart. That means the expansion of the consciousness of the personality, where we, from that understanding of the larger existence, can now make decisions from a will that's not anymore run by the ego, but that's run by the will of the heart. So that is, we bring that into relationship work, into individual work, and more companies and many structures are interested, as you said, how we bring love into it, but not from an esoteric aspect, not from a sexual aspect. I mean, they're all part of it, but from the aspect as a resonance with the flow of life, and how is it represented for you? What aspect do you want to look at? What aspect are you interested in? A couple comes with a different understanding than a manager who wants to be coached. A person who had a trauma comes from a different aspect, and that we know from our trauma work is a very different approach than just other consciousness work of expansion and breathing. You need to first have a solid ground. You need to see, is the world safe again for your system? And all that must be taken into account. And that's where sometimes misconception comes in about spiritual work. I mean, when you do mindfulness work, and I'm doing it for over 20 years, more or less for 40 years, because we called it sensory awareness in the past, you know, in the work, and all the mindfulness principles that we have in Buddhism, we call it for 100 years mindfulness. So, but it becomes very popular in our culture. And it's influencing every part of our society, and that's wonderful, you know. So, and nevertheless there are pitfalls, and that must be looked at. Just doing mindfulness work doesn't mean the person will shift or change. It's the opposite, that person may be even threatened. So, I had people, fortunately I knew them, just getting up and walking out. Just by sitting and centering. Where that person says, you know what? And then we have to look again at the personality, because in my program of the energy and consciousness program that we lead, we work with Zen masters and Sufi teachers and with other consciousness teachers from other cultures, so that they can do their work and I integrate with body-oriented psychotherapy. So and here in the Zen
session, an integral process to this work.
Then we process it, what comes up. So, and good Zen teachers know that a lot of stuff comes up, but depending on your culture and tradition, you have ways of dealing with it in your own culture, but we are working in the Western culture. So here, when material from your personality is activated, like this woman just gets up, walks out, and I know she will come back afterwards, but then I ask her, hey, what happened, you know? She said, you know what? My mother has been a very known woman in our country as a feminist, you know. And she has been one of the first yoga teachers, you know. And when I was 12 and 13, she always wanted me on her side, that I become like her, you know. And now you invite me to sit down and center, I just had to go. So,
Interesting.
So the same is, it could have been a trauma situation, boom, then there's a resonance with that. So we gotta we gotta see, yeah, mindfulness work is wonderful, and we also gotta understand and see, oh, there are limitations, and we gotta modify the approach for that person. So that's how I like to work. Well, and that embedded, of course, in the range from spirituality to science. That's why I do the biophotonic work, that's why I do infrared photography that I could show you more later, or you see tomorrow evening. So it's I feel very complex in the way that I came to bring light into people's body. So that was my original intention of coming into this life.
So your mission. So can you say that again? So you came into this life with the vision to
bring light into people's body.
I think that's lovely. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I still feel like that more than ever, and that's why these 2 days or last 4 days are wonderful, and that's what I teach everywhere, whether in business or whether in medical schools. But of course, these days, light is not just anymore spiritual expression. The expression of that we radiate light and create light is physics. So, and we can show that in detail. So in that respect, I would like to hold the balance in that expression, to bring light into people's body.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and speak with us. And I look forward to your presentation tomorrow.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so.
Yeah. I think I can stay another half hour now. Yeah.